The sky above Carvel 9 dimmed as if someone had dragged a blade across the stars. From the observation deck of Fort Bastion, Captain Elias Ward watched the darkness spread. It wasn't clouds or weather. It was metal. Vast, deliberate, perfectly aligned. Virexian warships slid into orbit one by one, their hulls gleaming with polished arrogance, blocking constellations humans had memorized for generations. A junior technician swallowed beside him. That's the whole fleet, sir. Ward didn't move. No, he said quietly. That's the part they want us to see. Below them, the colony stirred. Mining rigs powered down. Cargo haulers froze mid-landing. Families gathered in doorways, staring upward, hands clenched around each other. Fort Bastion had been built for storms, quakes, and supply shortages. It had never been built for this. The command room behind Ward buzzed with controlled tension. Holographic displays tracked orbital positions, energy signatures, and troop deployment markers painting the planet in hostile light. Every reading screamed the same message: overwhelming force. A comms officer turned. Incoming transmission. Priority Imperial Channel. Ward nodded. Put it through. The air shimmered as the projection formed. High Commander Jacques Virexis filled the room, tall, angular, plated in ceremonial armor etched with campaign sigils. His eyes were cold, amused, already bored. Inhabitants of Carvel 9, Jacques said, his voice smooth and amplified. You are in violation of Imperial claim statutes. Compliance will be rewarded with continued existence. Resistance will be instructive. A murmur rippled through the room. Ward raised a hand. Silence fell. Jacques continued. You are outnumbered. Outgunned. Your defenses are archaic. Lay down your arms, deactivate your facilities, and submit to annexation. This is your only opportunity. Ward stepped forward, folding his hands behind his back. He didn't raise his voice. High Commander, he said evenly, Fort Bastion is a civilian settlement. We have no interest in imperial politics. We're staying. Jacques tilted his head. You misunderstand. You are not being asked. No, Ward replied. I understand perfectly. For a heartbeat, the commander stared. Then he laughed, a sharp, metallic sound. Record this, Jacques said, glancing aside. Let the galaxy witness what happens when primitives cling to pride. The projection vanished. The room exhaled all at once. Someone cursed under their breath. Another officer whispered, Sir, we can't hold against that. Ward turned slowly, meeting each pair of eyes. We're not holding against the fleet, he said. We're holding against what they send down here. A tactical officer pulled up surface scans. They're deploying ground legions. Heavy infantry. Full shield arrays. Ward nodded. Expected. Another voice, tighter. They scanned our defenses. They saw the emplacement. A pause. Then, quieter still. Sir, they laughed. Ward allowed himself the faintest smile. Good. That earned him looks, confused, uneasy. He moved to the central display and expanded a terrain map of the valley leading to Fort Bastion. Natural choke points glowed amber. Hard rock ridges. Narrow approaches. Old mining scars that cut deep channels through the ground. This isn't a standoff, Ward said. It's a lesson. A lieutenant frowned. With respect, sir, they're running energy shields rated for orbital debris. Plasma deflectors. Adaptive harmonics. Yes, Ward said. And they've built their entire doctrine around them. He tapped the map. Which means they've forgotten something very old. No one spoke. The hum of systems filled the gap. Outside, deep in the reinforced earthworks overlooking the valley, a weapon sat silent. Thick barrels clustered around a central axis. Feed belts coiled neatly, brass catching the dim light. It looked out of place among modern sensors and composite armor plating. Like a fossil someone had refused to bury. A sergeant ran his hand along the housing. Hard to believe this thing scares anyone anymore. Ward joined him. It doesn't scare them. he said. That's the point. The sergeant hesitated. You really think it'll work? Ward didn't answer right away. He checked the cooling system, inspected the mounts, nodded to the crew as they worked with methodical precision. No speeches. No dramatics. Just preparation. Do you know why weapons like this were built? Ward asked finally. To kill, the sergeant said. Ward shook his head. To keep working. When power failed. When conditions were bad. When nothing else did what it was told. He looked out toward the valley. Dust plumes marked the distant touchdown of Imperial landing craft. Perfectly spaced. Perfectly timed. They rely on complexity, Ward said. We rely on physics. The first Imperial troops crested the ridge hours later. They came in immaculate ranks, armor gleaming, shields shimmering faintly around them. Banners hovered above their formations, projecting Imperial insignia meant to intimidate. They didn't rush. They didn't take cover. There was no need. Their doctrine promised invulnerability. In orbit, Jacques watched the feed with satisfaction. Observe, he said to his staff. They have not fired. Fear paralyzes them. A junior officer leaned closer to the display. Sir, our scans still show kinetic emplacements active. Jacques waved a dismissive claw. Relics. Let them cling to them. Advance. On the ground, the Gatling gun crew waited. Barrels still. Belts locked. Fingers off triggers. Ward raised a hand. Hold, he said. The distance closed. Shields glowed brighter as the troops approached the marked engagement line. Imperial officers broadcast taunts over open channels, mocking human silence, mocking the old metal shape half buried in fortifications. Ward listened to none of it. He watched their formation tighten. Watched confidence turn into carelessness. Then he lowered his hand. Stand by, he said. The Gatling gun's barrels began to turn, slowly at first, a mechanical whisper rising into a hungry whine. In orbit, Jacques leaned forward, amused. There, he said. Let them have their moment. On the ground, the barrels spun faster. Ward's voice was calm. Wait for commitment. The Imperial front line stepped past the final marker. No, Ward said. The valley erupted. The Gatling gun did not fire. Its barrels spun down, the whine fading into silence, leaving only the hiss of wind moving through the valley. Dust settled. Imperial troops continued their advance, shields pulsing in disciplined rhythm, boots striking the ground in perfect cadence. From orbit, the pause looked like hesitation. Inside Fort Bastion, no one spoke. Captain Elias Ward stood with his hands resting on the cold edge of the parapet, eyes locked on the approaching formation. He could feel the tension behind him, the weight of every life balanced on his restraint. The weapon crew waited, muscles tight, fingers hovering, breathing measured. A lieutenant broke the silence. Sir, they're inside optimal range. I know, Ward replied. They'll reach the outer kill zone in under a minute. Ward nodded once. That's when they expect us to panic. Behind them, the command channel crackled. Imperial voices spilled through, translated automatically, laced with amusement. Observe the humans, an officer sneered. They activate a ceremonial device and freeze. Another laughed. Perhaps it requires prayer. Ward muted the channel with a flick of his wrist. He turned to face his officers. Their expressions ranged from grim trust to thinly veiled fear. Listen carefully, he said. What you're feeling right now is exactly what they want. Doubt. Rush. Noise. A young corporal swallowed. Sir, with respect, if that shield holds. It won't, Ward said, not sharply, not gently. Simply certain. He stepped closer to the tactical display, bringing up a simplified schematic of an Imperial infantry unit. Layers of protection glowed in clean colors. Shield envelope. Energy dispersion grid. Thermal bleed system. Environmental regulation. Galactic armies fight light, Ward said. Energy against energy. Elegant. Precise. And brittle. The lieutenant frowned. Brittle, sir? Because everything depends on everything else, Ward replied. You disrupt one layer, the rest compensate. But only for what they're designed to stop. He highlighted the shield envelope. These shields are tuned for plasma, particle beams, radiation spikes. They disperse heat. They redirect force over time. Ward tapped the screen again. They were never meant to deal with sustained mass. Silence followed. Understanding crept in slowly. They think kinetics are inefficient. Ward continued. Single-shot impacts. Limited penetration. Museums teach that. History disagrees. Outside, the Imperial formation halted briefly. Officers barked orders. Banners shifted, realigning for a frontal push meant to be recorded and remembered. In orbit, High Commander Jacques watched with growing irritation. Why have they not fired? An aide hesitated. Perhaps they are stalling, Commander. For what? Jacques snapped. There is nothing to stall. The feed zoomed in on the Gatling emplacement. Its barrels were still. The machine looked ancient against a modern battlefield, squat and unadorned, lacking even the dignity of intimidation. Jacques bared his teeth. Begin the broadcast. I want this preserved. Back on the ground, Ward keyed the internal channel. Final checks. Ammunition green. Cooling steady. Mount locked. Ward closed his eyes for half a second, then opened them. He remembered lecture halls, old texts, grainy footage of wars humanity barely taught anymore. He remembered how often victory belonged not to the most advanced, but to the most prepared. A voice behind him, quieter than the rest. Sir, why this weapon? Ward looked back. The question wasn't tactical. It was human. Because it doesn't care what it's shooting at, he said. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't adapt. It just delivers force, again and again, until something breaks. The Imperial troops advanced again, confidence fully restored by the silence. Their shields brightened as they entered the valley proper, overlapping into a continuous wall of shimmering energy. Range, the lieutenant said. Hold, Ward replied. Imperial comms broke through again, unmuted this time by design. Human Commander. Jacques' voice echoed across the valley. Your delay is noted. You have achieved nothing but embarrassment. Ward leaned forward, activating external audio. High Commander, he said calmly. May I ask you something? Jacques paused, surprised. Speak. When was the last time your troops trained against kinetic suppression? Laughter erupted across the Imperial channel. Kinetic? Jacques scoffed. That doctrine was abandoned before your species achieved orbit. Ward nodded once. That explains a lot. He cut the channel. The front ranks of Imperial infantry crossed the final marker. Sensors chimed softly inside Fort Bastion. The weapon crew tensed. Ward raised his hand. Remember, he said, voice steady. They are not monsters. They are soldiers following bad ideas. The barrels began to rotate again, faster this time, the sound low and predatory. The Imperial formation slowed, confusion rippling through their ranks as shield harmonics flickered in response to an unexpected stimulus. In orbit, Jacques leaned forward, curiosity replacing contempt. They intend to fire. An aide frowned at incoming data. Commander, the energy profile is inconsistent. Of course it is, Jacques said. It is primitive. On the ground, the Gatling gun reached full rotation. The weapon vibrated with restrained violence. Brass links trembled. The air itself seemed to tighten. Ward watched the range indicator tick down to the exact number he wanted. Fire, he said. The Gatling gun answered with thunder. Not a single blast, not a beam, not a flash of light, but a continuous roar, mechanical and merciless. The first round slammed into the Imperial shield wall like a hammer striking glass again and again and again. At first, nothing happened. Then the shields rippled. Imperial soldiers stumbled as the force transferred through systems never meant to absorb momentum. Warning glyphs flared across their visors. Thermal regulators spiked. Energy dispersal grids overloaded, trying to bleed heat that wasn't there. The rounds kept coming. Microfractures raced across the shield's surface, invisible at first, then catastrophic. With a sound like tearing fabric, the front layer collapsed. The next volley tore through armor. Screams replaced laughter. Jacques shot to his feet. What is happening? Data flooded his display: casualty spikes, system failures, formations dissolving under sheer kinetic pressure. On the ground, Ward didn't smile. He watched the valley transform under relentless fire, the old weapon proving its purpose not through spectacle, but through inevitability. Maintain fire, he said quietly. The Empire's lesson had begun. The valley became a corridor of chaos. The Gatling gun's roar never paused, never hesitated. It was not angry. It was not triumphant. It was mechanical certainty made audible. Streams of rounds carved straight through the collapsing shield line, punching into armor that had never been tested against sustained physical impact. Imperial soldiers fell in clusters, momentum throwing bodies backward, formation dissolving into confusion within seconds. Inside Fort Bastion, the firing crew worked without looking up. Feed belts were swapped with practiced efficiency. Cooling systems vented superheated air in sharp bursts. Brass casings poured onto the reinforced decking, piling at their boots. Shields are down across the first two ranks, the lieutenant reported, eyes locked on the tactical overlay. Enemy return fire is scattered. Of course it is, Ward said. They don't train for disorder. Outside, plasma bolts finally streaked back toward the fort, wild and unfocused. Most struck the ground or dissipated against hardened walls. A few splashed harmlessly against Bastion's outer plating. Nothing coordinated. Nothing sustained. Imperial officers screamed orders, their voices overlapping, command hierarchies collapsing under pressure they had never anticipated. Units designed to advance in flawless symmetry now tripped over fallen comrades, struggling to identify threats that refused to conform to their doctrine. A Virexian captain tried to rally his squad, raising his command staff high. A burst of kinetic fire tore through him and the soldiers behind him in the same instant, armor failing catastrophically. The banner collapsed into the dirt. From orbit, High Commander Jacques stared at the feed in disbelief. Cease advance, he barked. Reform defensive perimeter. Adjust shield harmonics. An aide shook his head, panic creeping into his voice. Commander, recalibration isn't responding. The impact frequency is exceeding predictive limits. That is impossible, Jacques snapped. Increase power allocation. We can't, another officer said. The cooling systems are saturated. The shields are cooking themselves. Jacques' claws dug into the armrest. He had crushed worlds with less resistance than this. Reduced civilizations to compliance with a single orbital strike. And now his elite ground legions were being shredded by something his academies had dismissed as obsolete. On the ground, Ward watched the enemy line buckle inward. He raised his hand slightly. Shift pattern, he said. Walk the fire. The Gatling's aim adjusted by degrees, the stream of rounds sweeping laterally. Any pocket of resistance vanished under the relentless pressure. Imperial troops broke, some turning to flee, others dropping prone in desperate attempts to reduce their profile. It made no difference. They're retreating, the lieutenant said. Not yet, Ward replied. They're trying to understand. As if on cue, a new threat emerged. Heavier Imperial units pushed forward through the wreckage, bulky forms reinforced with layered plating, personal shield generators glowing brighter than the rest. Shock troops. Designed to punch through resistance and restore order. Targets marked, the firing sergeant said. Ward studied them for a fraction of a second. Concentrate fire. Same approach. The rounds slammed into the heavier shields. For a moment they held, energy fields flaring violently as they struggled to disperse force they were never meant to manage continuously. Warning lights strobed across Imperial visors. Then one generator failed. Then another. The shock troops died standing, their superior armor turning into shrapnel under sustained impact. Silence fell briefly between bursts as the gun paused for a cooling cycle. The valley echoed with screams, static-filled commands, and the hiss of failing systems. Ward exhaled slowly. Resume. The Gatling roared back to life. Imperial morale collapsed. Units began abandoning equipment, tearing off damaged armor to run faster. Some tried to surrender, weapons raised, but the chaos made coordination impossible. Others fired blindly, panic overriding discipline. The Empire's perfect war machine unraveled under the weight of something brutally simple. In orbit, Jacques stood rigid, watching his legacy disintegrate. Deploy reserves, he ordered. They won't reach the valley intact, an aide said quietly. Commander, the humans control the approach. Jacques' eyes burned. Then pull them back. All ground forces. Full withdrawal. The order rippled through the shattered command network. What remained of the Imperial legions turned and fled, abandoning the battlefield in disorder that would be studied for generations. On the ground, Ward raised his hand again. Cease fire. The Gatling gun wound down, its barrels glowing faintly as they slowed. The sudden quiet felt unreal, heavy after the constant thunder. Smoke drifted across the valley, carrying the sharp scent of scorched metal and disturbed earth. For several seconds, no one spoke. Then a corporal whispered, "They're gone." Ward nodded. "They're running." A cheer tried to rise. He cut it off with a glance. "Medical teams out," he said. Now. Human soldiers moved immediately, disciplined even in victory. Stretchers came forward. Drones swept the field for survivors. The work began before the adrenaline faded. Ward stepped away from the parapet and activated the external channel. "High Commander Jacques," he said, his voice carrying across the valley and up toward the fleet above. "Your ground forces are in retreat. This engagement is over." There was a pause. Then Jacques' image flickered into view, armor dulled, confidence cracked. "This is not finished," the commander hissed. Ward met his gaze without hostility. "No," he said. "It's decided." The projection vanished. Above Carvel 9, Imperial ships began to pull back from low orbit, their formation no longer pristine. The sky lightened as stars slowly reappeared. Ward returned his attention to the valley. The Gatling gun sat silent again, steaming gently, its ancient design unchanged by the devastation it had delivered. He rested a hand briefly against its housing. Around him, his people worked, tending wounds, securing the perimeter, preparing for whatever came next. The Empire had come expecting obedience. It had found resistance shaped like memory, steel, and patience. And it had broken. Dawn arrived slowly over Carvel 9, pale light cutting through drifting smoke. The valley that had echoed with thunder hours earlier lay broken and still. Cratered earth stretched outward like torn skin, littered with shattered armor, fallen banners, and abandoned weapons that no longer hummed with power. The Empire had come with precision and pageantry. It had left in silence. Captain Elias Ward walked the perimeter without escort. His boots crunched over debris as medics and engineers moved with quiet urgency behind him. No one celebrated. Victory had weight, and it pressed down on every step. A field medic looked up as Ward passed. "Enemy survivors are retreating beyond sensor range, sir." "No pursuit." Ward nodded. "Good. Let them leave knowing why." The Gatling gun stood where it always had, half sunk into reinforced earth, barrels darkened, metal still warm. A thin stream of vapor rose from its housing. The crew worked around it carefully, wiping residue, checking mounts, treating it with the same respect they would a wounded comrade. The firing sergeant straightened when he saw Ward. "Barrels held. Minimal warping. She'll be ready again once cooled." Ward rested a hand on the weapon's casing. "She did her job." "So did you," the sergeant said. Ward didn't respond. He looked out over the valley again, eyes tracing the path the Imperial forces had taken, forward with confidence, back with fear. Above them, the sky had changed. The vast silhouettes that had blotted out the stars were gone. The Virexian fleet had withdrawn to high orbit, then beyond it, slipping away without ceremony. No threats. No final declarations. Just distance. In a quiet chamber aboard the retreating flagship, High Commander Jacques sat alone. His armor lay discarded at his feet, ceremonial sigils dulled by ash and data readouts that refused to make sense. Screens replayed the same moments again and again, shields failing, formations collapsing, troops scattering under relentless kinetic fire. An aide entered hesitantly. "Commander, the Council is requesting a full report." Jacques did not look up. "They already have it," he said. "The galaxy has it." The aide swallowed. "They are reassessing human threat classifications." Jacques' claws tightened. "They should have done so centuries ago." He dismissed the aide with a flick of his hand and stared once more at the footage. Not at the destruction, but at the human commander standing calmly amid it. No raised fists. No triumph. Only resolve. On Carvel 9, Fort Bastion settled into a cautious calm. Civilians emerged slowly, eyes wide as they took in the aftermath. Children stared at the valley from safe distances, whispering questions their parents struggled to answer. "Did we win?" one asked. Ward heard the question and turned. He crouched to the child's level. "We held," he said. "That's enough." Later, in the command room, updated transmissions poured in from across known space. Military analysts, scholars, and strategists replayed the battle from every angle. Energy-only doctrines were pulled apart line by line. Words like obsolete and primitive vanished from official language, replaced by terms far less comforting. Kinetic suppression. Sustained mass impact. Doctrinal blind spot. A communications officer looked up from the console. "Sir, multiple governments are requesting dialogue." Ward exhaled slowly. "Tell them we'll talk when the wounded are cared for." "Yes, sir." A lieutenant hesitated. "They're calling us something new." Ward glanced over. "What?" "Extinction-level combatants." Ward closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, there was no pride there. Only understanding. That's what happens when fear replaces thinking. As the day wore on, Fort Bastion repaired itself. Damaged walls were reinforced. Systems recalibrated. The colony returned to function, slower than before, but intact. Humanity had not expanded its borders. It had simply refused to vanish. Near sunset, Ward returned to the Gatling emplacement one last time. The crew had finished maintenance, covering the weapon with protective shielding. It looked unremarkable again, quiet and patient. A young officer approached. "Sir, do you think they'll come back?" Ward considered the question carefully. "Yes," he said. "Eventually." "And next time?" Ward looked out toward the stars, now fully visible again. "Next time, they'll be careful." The officer frowned. "Is that better?" Ward met his gaze. "It's honest." As night fell, signals rippled outward through the galaxy. Empires adjusted training manuals. Shield manufacturers revised assumptions. Military academies reopened chapters long sealed away. Somewhere, on worlds that had never heard of Earth or Fort Bastion, commanders stared at kinetic schematics with new respect. Humanity's name changed tone overnight. No longer dismissed. No longer laughed at. Spoken carefully, sometimes quietly. Not because of innovation. Because of memory. Ward stood alone for a while longer, listening to the wind move through the valley. He thought of old wars, old engineers, people who had built weapons not for glory, but for survival. He thought of how often progress forgot its roots. Behind him, Fort Bastion's lights glowed steady against the dark. The Gatling gun rested beneath its cover, silent once more, unchanged by time or judgment. It did not demand acknowledgement. It did not need legend. It would wait. And if the galaxy ever forgot again, it would remind them, one unrelenting moment at a time.